Be the Wolf. I am super excited. I am here with Mike O'Connor, and we're going to talk about those patterns where you keep ending up with the same problems at the job you had. Now, I know this has happened to many of you before. You've left one job or you got promoted or something, and you thought it was going to be better. You thought that everything was going to be so great. And then 4 to 6 months later, you're like, shit, everything is exactly the same problems, different boss, whatever. So we're going to talk about that. And so if that's happened to you, you probably would want to continue to listen. So, but Mike is doing something that is perfect for him now. He's not having those problems anymore. So, what are you doing today?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you, and I just love the analogy that you have for opening the show. But right now, I am working as a consultant and coach, so I help higher education schools, universities, and colleges sort of up their career services program. But the thing that I also work on that I'm super passionate about is sort of coaching and helping people find professions and jobs that they absolutely love and that connects with their inner voice, their inner wolf, if you will.
Right.
So great to be here and glad to be with you.
I'm super excited. Okay, now, we all have a why we do the things that we do. And most people are not really aware of why they're doing it. Oh, I have to pay the bills and I have to make money, blah, 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 blah. So that's their why as far as they know. But I know most of the people that come here on Be the Wolf, they've found something that's true and right for them. So there is a why they do what they do. So for you, why is it that you do what you do?
Yeah, work represents like such an incredibly like big piece of our lives. And to sort of do, you know, like 40% of your waking life and do it without any kind of purpose, without any kind of intentionality, or to, sort of work in any capacity that doesn't really sort of connect to that like inner voice or the thing that is just you and the things that are inherently you that you've designed and baked and become and sort of stepped into, like that's just really sad. And I know so many people, and I've been that person that is just very disconnected from the sort of bigger why. So like my why is helping people find their why. Because I've had it and I've lost it and I found it again, and it feels really good. And it feels really good to sort of have it. So my why is essentially sort of help more people find their why and connect with things that really sort of bring them joy, and that meet and help the needs of others, and help them sort of essentially sort of take the things that they're best at and the things that they love, and sort of connect that to needs in the world.
I love this because one of the keys to happiness, right? And those of you that know my why, I always say it at the end, but I'll say it right now. It's when we feel good about who we are and what we do, we create joy and elevate humanity. And so one of the keys to happiness, which of course is creating joy, is that we have to have a bigger problem to solve. The brain needs a problem to work on, and it's not the problem. It needs a good problem to work on. Let me clarify, because making sure I don't end up on the street is not a good problem to solve. As soon as you can solve that problem time and time again, and it makes you go forward and then stop, you pay the rent, you stop, forward, stop, and so it's not a good problem to solve. We need a problem that's not solvable. right? Forever, I can find a million ways to help people feel good about who they are, what they do, create the joy. I can do that all day long for the rest of 18 million lifetimes. And so having that key, that purpose, that why is so important to your happiness because it gives you something creative, something bigger and more expansive to focus on. I think before we dive deeper, this is a really good time, Mike, for you to tell people about the free gift you have that helps people unlock their superpowers and purpose. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can find it on my website, it's theactualizedself.com, the hyphen actualized hyphen self. And then we've got linked in the show notes here as well. But it's essentially two exercises to sort of find your purpose, right? So to work out what that sort of bigger mission is for yourself and start to kind of look at the things that you like doing and the things that bring you joy and putting those together and mapping them to the world's purpose. And then the other thing that I do with a lot of clients is called finding your superpower, where it's essentially like a really simple Google form that you're going to you can take and replicate. And it's got the questions sort of pre-filled, but you're going to ask 3 to 5 people, like, what is the thing that you'd steal from me if you could, right? So colleagues, friends, people that know you really well, like, what's the thing that I do better than 99% of people? And it's a fascinating exercise because more often than not, we discount the things that we're really good at because they're easy to us, right?
Right.
So like having that reflected back and seeing it just tends to be a really powerful exercise because the things that you see, you're like, well, that's easy. And it's just like, well, yeah, it's easy for you. Um, so I found it to be such a useful exercise because you just get a completely different mindset shift and concept about who you are and what's sort of unique about you from the vantage point of people that have worked really closely with you.
And one of the things that's really great about that, because people have this tendency to focus on what they lack. So and this is a survival skill, you guys. I mean, it's a survival thing that happened when life was much more difficult than it is to provide your basic needs, food, shelter, heat, water, because you had to focus on what you lacked so that you could survive. But here we are in this very abundant world, even though I know it might not feel like it, but that's because we're focused on what we lack. So it's really hard sometimes to see our own superpowers and our own strengths because we're comparing ourselves to others. We're seeing like, oh, they have that, I don't have that. So you're focused on what you lack. So I love this exercise for people. So if you are listening or watching right now, go to theactualizedself.com and there's hyphens in there. So it's the hyphen actualized hyphen self.com right now and grab that so you don't forget.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's true. And I think in the age of sort of social media, right? Like all of that has just become amplified. We compare ourselves so much to other people, and you're constantly sort of thinking from this, deficit mindset. And if you are somebody that's like really interested in improving yourself, like as your listeners are, right? And like leveling up and sort of stepping into the sort of better version of yourself, you're naturally going to be inclined to sort of like be working on your weaknesses and trying to sort of leverage your strengths and all of those things, but you're not necessarily sort of honoring the things that you do really, really well. And more often than not, I found that like leaning into your strengths, you always want to improve your weaknesses and try to get better, of course. And we all know that, but you're going to have a lot more ROI when you lean into the things that you're just naturally good at. You're going to find more joy and purpose and really sort of leveraging those.
Yeah. And one of the things, I think this will be a great place to lead into your story. One of the things that people are really very, this is a pattern they create. They feel like everything has to be hard. When you don't lean into your strengths, I mean, obviously, just like Mike said, you want to continue to improve yourself and get better at the things that you're not so great at because it helps you. But when things come easy to us, a lot of times we doubt it. We are like, Oh, this is too easy. It must be wrong. And so we will kind of pivot ourselves or self sabotage and make things harder because for some reason you have this belief that you have to work hard. And this has been drilled in, right? Generations. Just work hard and you'll be okay. Just work hard and nobody, you put your head down, work hard. Nobody can say anything to you. They won't fire you. Don't be too loud. Don't be too noisy. Just work hard. So many of us have grown up with this belief that we're not even aware of, that we have to work hard to have something good. So when things come easy because we're leaning into our superpowers, it's like we don't trust it.
Yeah, that's really well said. We don't trust it, or we don't. It's funny too because I think sometimes when you're sort of in that like flow state and you're just like in this sort of space of like this is so natural, you can actually like work long and hard, but it doesn't feel like work. You're just doing the thing that sort of comes natural to you. It's like a little bit of a challenge, but it's sort of like leveraging the things that you're really sort of good at, right? And that's another thing that I've just found really helpful, right? When you can just like find the conditions that sort of like help you sort of get into that sort of deeper, more immersive state and like start to engineer for that, right? It's like that magical mix of things that you're good at with like a little bit of that like challenged mixed in. And having the sort of conditions set up right. But those are like those magical moments in life, right? Like those like really incredible things where you're just firing on those different cylinders and you're just kind of in it and time just goes, completely different. But everything you said is just really right. Like we really discount some of our natural gifts and we have this idea that things are supposed to be hard or difficult or whatever, and a lot of that I feel like is just this sort of conditioning of this, the age that we've been in for a really long time, which was they're really specific jobs and there are very specific tasks, and your job is to sort of do these really sort of specific things. Um, and I'm just of the mindset that the world is shifting so very fast, and that our mental models just haven't really sort of caught up to like where it's really going. But I think we're in this sort of really unique space where we can sort of step in and sort of like live authentically and map to where the world is going versus where it's been.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we're arriving in the age of authenticity where we get to access what's true and right for us more and more. And those of you that have been listening for a long time, you know that it's my belief that the more people we have operating from that place, that we will rebalance our own ecosystem, just like the Yellowstone wolves did in Yellowstone, just by being who you were born to be. So Mike, you got a dream job a while back. And first of all, how did you know it was a dream job? What was it about this job that you thought it was your dream?
Yeah, I think I use the term dream job, and I think if I was like being as radically honest with myself, then as I have been in like the last like year, I wasn't. I was on a path. I think is kind of the reality, right? Where um, for a long time I was trying to essentially sort of step into a senior level career role, right? And I think my why when I started doing what something similar to what I'm doing now was like helping college students sort of find the things that they're really sort of curious and passionate about, and that was my why, right? Which isn't super different from what it is now. Um, but what happened along the way is I found myself in sort of positions where I would get promoted to leadership positions or sort of step into these different roles. And I had my eye on like the big job. And I was just so focused on that big job. I was just like, that's the next step. That's the thing I'm going to do. It was almost kind of like the default path. Right. And so, like, I think my dream was all completely self architected. It was all just kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to be happy when I hit this thing. right?
I'm
And
gonna be happy when.
I'm gonna be happy when, right? Like I've worked hard. I've done these different things, and I've positioned my skills and all these things to be really good for this, right? And wow, the people that are one step above me are making 60% more than I am. Like this is gonna sort of solve these like this imposter syndrome that I have, or this like these things that I have. It's going to sort of like help with, or whatever. And it's like, it's so funny that I thought that or felt that because I helped people get jobs. Like that's like what I did, right? Like I like it's like I listened to this stuff, I read the literature, I'd see these sort of faults in sort of other people, but I just wasn't, for whatever reason, it just wasn't sort of part of my operating system. I was just really sort of focused on getting this thing. And long story short, what had happened for me was I get recruited to a job. I have this like very crazy sort of set of circumstances where my second daughter was 12 days old. I interview on less than 24 hours notice. I had to leave leave my job, which was an hour away from home, say goodbye to like my wife and two kids, like hop on a flight, barely catch the flight, barely catch the connecting flight, don't make it there till midnight, then wake up, have a 12-hour interview, like go through this stuff and then get the offer. And it was like this crazy set of circumstances. And now it's just like, oh yeah, and we're going to move halfway across the country like for this thing, and we're going to sort of do it. And the combination of the finances and the opportunity and all of that, it was like I just felt like I couldn't say no to it, and nor did I want to, right? I had been working for a long time to sort of do this thing. And so I take the job. Great. It's going pretty well. Less than a year in, a few things happen, but COVID, big one. So everything sort of changes,
Every
with
episode
that.
is like dun dun dun, and then COVID happened.
I know it's so cliche. I like, do I say no?
Now it's
So
cliche. That's hilarious.
yeah,
This crazy thing happened, but now it's like cliche to
yeah.
say.
I
So
know. It's like everyone had it. Yeah. So COVID, and then my mom was dying, and I was just like this guilt of being so far away, and just not being there and not being present. Um, our second daughter, I think because of a combination of COVID and then, frankly, like work and my own, just sort of being preoccupied, and my wife and I like just spending more time on iPad and just not getting the interaction she really needed at the developmental stage. And we saw these like developmental delays popping up. And we had so like a year plus of like doing all of this. In fact, more than that. It was like more like a year and a half. I just like kind of like your analogy with Yellowstone and what was happening with that ecosystem, pre-wolves. It's like I felt like a part of me was dying. It was like, I was holding up all these different aspects of the school, and or felt like I was, I should say, stretching and trying to sort of do work in all these different areas, and do great work, and like really taxing myself to be like, okay, well, I'm going to push here, I'm going to push there. But I could feel that a lot of people from a lot of different areas were really sort of leaning on me, and I wasn't really sort of getting, like I wasn't sort of using the gifts that I had or the things that I had, or like growing in any kind of way, as much as I was just stretching.
one of the
Um,
one of the things that I see that's really interesting, because the work life started taking over, and the home life and the personal life needed more. You wanted to be able to give it more attention, but you were unable to because work was just more and more and more. And I think how many people out there can relate, like so many things. Oh, okay, you finished that. Here, can you do this too? Oh, and this too. But the way this job set up is like, here's this monumental thing in your family, your personal life that just happened. And here is this opportunity. So it's like, I always just find it so funny how life gives us the same sort of choices over and over, where it's like, do you choose what this monumental thing that just happened in your family and devote your attention to that? Or do you jump on a plane and run to connect the flight and
I
do
know.
this and then interview for 12 hours and all of this and then okay, and then a year later, here we go. Now you're at the same point where it's like, oh, there's this choice between what's going on in the personal life and the family, and then the running hectic at work. So it's already a mirror in that place. It's just, I find that so interesting about the way things really show up.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Yeah, it's like this funny, like door A, door B kind of dynamic, right? Like, which you can't have it both. You can't do both. Um, and yeah, I was going through all this, and and you and I had the pre-conversation, but just share with the listeners. When all of this happened, I made a really difficult decision to sort of say, you know what, like I have to really figure out a different path, and I just need to step away and I need to do something completely different. I don't even know what that is, but I need to do something different. And then what ended up happening was I got offered a very different job, essentially be the number 3 person at the school. And I was in the same place again. Right. And had this like big shiny object, big shiny opportunity in front of me. And those doors that you just referenced, like the same thing happened again. And I took it. And I was because I was like, how can I not? And how can I not do this? And then to make a really long story short, I found myself in the exact same place again, right? Like the same place. It was just this sort of like this pattern. And when I sort of stepped back from it now, or when I sort of even thought about it later, I was just like, this is the same thing that happened before I left the previous job or the job before that, or like the same thing happening again and again and
So
again. So when I look at
you were able to see it this time.
finally, yeah, and I shouldn't say that. I'd seen it before. I knew it was a pattern. I knew it existed. For some reason, I thought that this shiny object, which was a different path and a different thing.
Right. And I think that's what people do because, it's like, oh, this is totally different. This is not like the other thing. It's a totally different. First, it starts with, a different company. But so this is a different, same job, different company. It will be different this time. And then you get there 6 months in, you're like, oh, okay. Well, let me you do that a couple times, then you realize, okay, changing companies doesn't do it. So maybe I have to change careers and do something totally different. So then you change careers and, it's one thing after another. But what were the things like I know you've done the work to discover what was going on within you that was creating that pattern?
Yeah, it was like this inner. That's a really good question. I'm trying to think about how to sort of best answer and also sort of put myself back in this place. But it was just taking too much energy to fake it, right? And it got to the point where there was this one particular day, like I'll never forget, where um, I think I'm a little bit like angry about like a passive aggressive email I got the night before. And I'm like, this is like, why am I spending energy on this? Right. It was like I was in that mental state in the morning and I, dropped my daughter off at daycare. And like the thing that brought me like a little bit of joy in the morning was like going to this nice coffee shop, seeing the same people that work there and like getting my coffee and just like being like, okay, I'm going to disconnect for the day. I've got some quiet time. I'm going to have this nice walk in, beautiful day. Like we're all good. Right. But I walk into like my little happy place and there's 2 people that I was like emailing with that like I was having like this like stupid little thing that like, and I saw them there and I remember just being like, nope, not doing it. I walked right out. Just like, I was like, I don't have the energy to have this like completely fake interaction. And I don't, and the only way I'm going to get through this like little interaction, this is terrible to say, was like, I'm going to have to like either one, tell somebody off um, or like completely sort of swallow things that in a way that I don't feel good about. I don't want to do either of those. Right. And it was like, but it was like, it was that sign for me where it's just like, okay, like if I can't like have a conversation with somebody who's just like, just doing something that they feel that they need to do to get through their day, and I
Right.
can't like sort of do that, like maybe I'm not in the right place, or like maybe there's like something telling me here that like this is not a great situation, and this is something that you should really sort of evaluate and get a little bit sort of more curious about. So there
It's
was that, and then
yeah.
oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say it's real interesting because I know a lot of people really can relate to that place where let's just put on the smile and go to work, even though I just want to stab people and do things that I will never do, and I will hold it all in, and creating more and more stress for the body. And so those moments where you feel like you have to fake it
Totally.
is an indication that you're experiencing stress. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And it was just like, it was, there was so many little things like that. And there was a series of events that I was like sort of putting together, and different sort of things, that I was hosting or facilitating or leading or whatever. Um, and, I feel like there's always this sort of interesting sort of balance and dynamic that we all sort of walk between, like our authentic selves and like the professional self. And I think like ideally you want to learn like where the two sort of intersect, or, be in a place where it's like you can just be completely authentic, right? And not have that sort of energy drain. But for me, it's like the two were just kind of getting pulled apart a bit. And the overlap was like just really, really small. And I wasn't really sort of like finding that, which didn't feel good. So I knew with that, like as I sort of stepped back, I was like, it's time to really sort of reevaluate and start to kind of look at different things, and sort of be in a different space, and and work on things that I care about, that are authentic and that will help people, and that sort of help all these other things. And when I sort of stepped back and I took the sort of bigger diagnostic, like I realized that so much of my conditioning around things like money were like completely scarcity mindset. And I think just like so baked into my identity from a young age, that like the script was like overpowering the realities of like what the spreadsheet actually like was telling me, when I looked at like, okay, well, if you were in this much income doing these kind of things, like this will pay for stuff. So, yeah, I think it was, for me, it was a lot of like, it was a funny mix of like really addressing the sort of authentic things that were just sort of pulling me apart from what I didn't want to do. And then like just really sort of like looking very realistically and honestly at like a lot of the different things that I wanted to do and that I could control for, and knew I had some autonomy over. So, happy to say in a much better place.
Well, you've got that place where the scarcity mindset is running your life. And I know, again, I know so many people can relate to this place because you're focused on what's going to happen if you don't do something, right? It's not focusing on what you have. It's like, oh, I have to do this or I will lose these things, realizing that you have the capacity to go somewhere else, do something different, all of these things. But when you've been brought up in that fear mindset that you have to prevent the catastrophes from happening, you're focusing on all the things you don't have. We talked about it a little bit in the beginning, that you're focusing on what you lack. We are comparing yourself to other people, like, oh my gosh, they have a new Mercedes Benz. I felt like I wanted to sing that in a country twang there. But you're focusing on things other people have that you think that you lack, that you think will be the source of making you happy. But once you start to realize that you have enough, you are enough, your nervous system starts to calm down, and that stress of trying to fake it at work changes.
Yeah.
You start to feel calm and move forward in a different way. Internally you feel safe, and the reality is most people don't feel safe. And so they're experiencing all this stress. They're thinking they have to fake it to make sure that they're safe, all of these different things. And this is a good time. A lot of you don't know, you guys are doing all these things to manage stress. You're going to yoga, you're learning to meditate, you're doing all this stuff. But the problem is if you're doing a ton of self-care to try to get through your horrible job, you're actually making your stress worse. And you guys can find out more about this at elevatefreegift.com. There's a guide that you can download that is called 3 Reasons Self-Care Makes Your Career Stress Worse. And the one thing that works, so open up the browser, elevatefreegift.com. You can get that free guide. And so you're feeling the stress. The stress is overwhelming. You know it's time to make a move. So what is it that you do?
Yeah, well, just to sort of underscore something that you just said there. Yeah, I was doing exactly what you just said, right? Like, I was doing like daily journaling and meditation and like working out, like doing all of this stuff and sort of checking in. And I just kind of found myself sort of getting back into this sort of space. And for myself, to sort of make a bigger move, there was a few things. There was the sort of like looking at costs and getting like really particular and granular with like sort of financial needs and things like that. So that was a big part of it, just for the mental side of it, and like looking at things like healthcare costs and like all of that, and like the ideas that I had in my head again just didn't map to reality. It's just like, okay, if I cut these expenses here, here, and here, like I'm good, right? And like
Right.
we're gonna be okay with if I XYZ, right? So that was, I think, a huge mental hurdle because it just sort of undid the block, and sort of so much of it. But what I had to do for myself too, which is like a little like sort of hard to admit, but like my imposter syndrome was like so great. Like despite like working at one of the best like colleges in the world and getting recruited and like stepping into like this bigger role and taking on these like consulting positions, that I was like I had to like create an evidence folder. Like I had to like create and like look at like the wins that I had from these different areas like of my like career and life. And I had to like stack it all up and like look at it to objectively even sort of say like, oh yeah, like maybe you have some like worth to like do this. And it's like it's terrible to say that, but it's true. Like I had to like see it on paper to like kind of start to convince myself, and then I had to like do like keep learning more skills and like stacking the skills that I already had on top of the things that I already did to continue to prove it to myself. Because it just didn't like I just didn't really sort of like feel it. And the more I started to kind of like do that, but I actually like kind of look at the evidence, the more I was just like, I kind of was just like, oh, okay. Like I started to like see it, and
Right.
then like the feedback I'd get from other people that I had heard enough, like it started to just sort of like hit different. Because if you can hear it, but not really sort of like feel it. And like for me, I had to like see evidence of it and then hear it. And then like I was like, okay. And then like self-concept and some of that like belief and confidence and stuff like starts to sort of change a little bit. And as I sort of reframed some of those pieces, I was just like, okay, I'm starting to sort of get this more. Let's start testing stuff and let's start kind of like trying out all these different things and step back and be like, let's have a longer time frame. This isn't going to be something that's like super easy, but like, you can do it. You've done these kind of things before, and that was helpful.
One of the things that I really love about you sharing about your imposter syndrome is because when I hear about imposter syndrome and I hear people talking about it, 99% of the time it's women. Women talking about imposter syndrome, and I feel like a phony if I get this job. And here you are, a white man who in theory is like has all the privilege in the world, and you do,
Yeah, totally.
But the thing about it is we all struggle with this. And one of the things that might be different for and why it's not talked about is because men are not stereotypically supposed to admit a weakness. So women are talking about it because in theory it's okay for women to talk about how they're feeling and what's how they're vulnerable. That's an okay quality, but it's very profound and beautiful that you shared with us that you were feeling this, because I know I work with men and women. I know that men experience this feeling of imposter syndrome or not feeling good enough as much as women do. And you shared a beautiful way to start focusing and bringing yourself to that belief that you are good enough. And it's the opposite of the scarcity mindset, right? So instead of focusing on all these things that you lack, you start writing down all the things that you've done, all the things that you have, the skills, the things you've acquired internally, the internal resources. You're probably starting to notice some of your superpowers. So the more you focus on those things that you have, you start to feel abundant and full. It's the opposite of feeling and focusing on what it is that you lack.
Totally, and thank you for saying that. It's funny that you said the piece around the sort of like the male dynamic versus females. Like I've like worked at a number of schools where we talked about imposter syndrome a lot, and whenever I heard it, and this is just like me being completely like honest male, I was so, I think, afraid to sort of like look inward or sort of like acknowledge whatever piece of it, like that I didn't want to talk about it ever, or I didn't want to like I'd hear it and I'd internalize it and then even sort of recognize it in like people and just be like, oh, well, they're probably feeling that. And I was empathetic enough to like learn and be curious about that, but I didn't ever turn that inward. Or even sort of say it. So like for a long time, like I had this almost sort of conditioned response when I heard imposter syndrome to like not like personally acknowledge it or like want to look inward or anything like that. And it took like a long time for me to even just like start to be able to like turn that a little bit inward and be like, oh yeah, like maybe that's what's happened, or maybe this is the sort of thing that's happening. Um and sort of acknowledge that like when I was at this school, like this so many sort of brilliant people, like I'd look around sometimes and be like, how am I here? Like, how did I land here? How did like all that kind of stuff? But I never wanted to like really sort of like own that or sort of see that or anything like that. And then as I sort of stepped into these other roles, I saw it just like really sort of coming up, but I was pushing it away so much. And I think like one of the things that happened to me was I was hesitant to make this sort of transition away from my job, because I was like feeling that imposter syndrome, like there was this conditioning I had to kind of say like, oh well, like you should run towards the things that you're scared of, and you're scared of this, and like you need to sort of like confront this sort of head on, but not sort of understanding the nuance between that and it's like, oh yeah, well this is just not a good fit for you, right? Like you're
Mm.
not ignoring imposter syndrome by sort of doing something that's like, no, you're gonna like you're gonna feel this in a lot of different sort of areas or sort of things like, but like you can't sort of conflate the sort of like not being a good fit with this sort of thing. And that's totally what I was doing, where I was just kind of saying like, oh well yeah, you're like scared of this thing, you have to like run towards it. Um and not really sort of acknowledging like, well yeah, you can do that, but you're not necessarily running towards the right thing.
Well, and that's a huge thing because I do that. If I feel scared of something, I step in. But
Yes.
I understand and I've done so much work that I can tell the difference between stepping into the unknown versus stepping into something that's not right or like panic. So the panic is stepping into something that's dangerous or not right for you. And for me, that feels like a very frenetic kind of fear.
Yeah.
And the stepping into the unknown, something that's good for me, that's just, unknown and scary, that feels like a very like deep in my belly kind of fear. And so because I can tell the difference, it's really easy to navigate. And the only reason I can tell the difference is because I'm not running in that panic scarcity mindset and energy in my body, because it used to be that it all felt the same.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
when
you've
you're
trained yourself to like feel it in your body. Like, so for
yeah,
you, it's just like like, it's just like, this is like frenzied energy versus like, this is like a different kind of like belly kind of like fear. And it's like, so for you, it's like run towards the belly, like, but stay away from frenetic.
right. Yeah. And so what was it that happened for you that made you realize like, oh, this is not right for me?
Yeah, I think it was just like the little signs like here and there. And I think like the biggest thing I just sort of noticed was just like there was an amount of because I think that the higher you step up in most organizations, and certainly the field I was working in, the more political it becomes. And it's just a reality. And it's just like, but there was so many sort of like rules sort of written in under and around sort of like how to navigate these politics. And it was just so antithetical to who I am, or the things that I think like sort of make me strong. Particularly I think like the place I was working. And it was really just an energy draw, right? It was just like the types of energy I was using versus like the types of energy like I have. And it was like there was at some point the balance was just kind of like when there wasn't enough projects for me to sort of like really like leverage those unique superpowers and like derive value and do things. And when I didn't, I think because I've got this orientation to like want to like do the big thing and the hard thing and whatever. Like when I ran out of those and it was more sort of mundane day to day, like kind of things, and I didn't have the big thing, I was just like, oh, this energy just doesn't feel right. So it was that. It was like, it was, I think, a similar thing to what you just kind of said, where I was just like, this is not a good use of the life force that I have. And it was like, I think recognizing and really sort of owning that.
Well, and that really kind of comes back to being clear on the purpose, being clear on your superpowers, being clear on what gives you energy. Because if something's sucking your energy, right? Like we all have that like toxic friend that you're just like you hang out with them for 20 minutes and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I just ran a marathon. This is like, oh.
Yeah.
So if your job is like that, it's you can't conquer that because it's always going to be sucking you dry. And it's always going to be making you feel like you have a hole in your energy. And I'm going to guess, when you're working towards something that's right for you, it when you accomplish something that's hard and unknown and scary, there's a really positive dopamine hit that sort of banks energy, not just the one off and done. But I'm going to guess that those times when you would accomplish something, did you get those dopamine hits? Or
Yeah, you were like dead on. Yeah, yeah, dead on. Yeah, you're right. Like you can like it's like a storage unit you have, right? So it's just like I think a lot of people probably go through a similar cycle where it's just like you do the big dopamine thing, right? And like you're essentially I think feasting off that for weeks, right? And it's this like sort of almost sort of like feast and famine thing of like I do the big thing, I get the big hit, and then like you've got residuals that you're sort of running off from that for a little while. And then eventually I think I found probably like a lot of people like that just wasn't as sort of sustainable or whatever. And again, I think for me in particular, it was like kind of I had to sort of see some of this sort of irony in it where, I'd done, I think, a good job of helping so many people sort of like find and connect with these bigger things and do it. And I was just sort of noticing this disconnection of myself where I wasn't doing that anymore. Um, but once I sort of came to that realization and I think Liz just kind of faced some of the stuff head on, it just like it was just such a relief. And for me, it was just so much better to like acknowledge and work towards than like work against.
Yeah.
And and it felt a little bit sort of downhill from there, even with like typical struggles of sort of starting something new or sort of going into the unknown. It took ironically less energy to do that than it did to sort of like continue to sort of push uphill.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's like everyone gets so scared of the big work. You take the leap, like you move into that thing that's really aligned with you and feels good, and it just feels better. You have more energy. You get done with working 12 hours and you still have time and energy to like be present with your family or your friends, and that's such a powerful thing. So I want to reiterate to everybody, how important being connected to that bigger thing and your own superpowers, those things that fuel your energy are. And remember, you can go to the actualizedself.com to get that worksheet from Mike O'Connor. It's also going to be, the link will be in the show notes. And again, that's the-actualized-self.com. And if you're struggling with work stress and trying to do all the things to keep all the things balanced, but you're still exhausted, you definitely need to get the 3 reasons why self-care makes career stress worse than the one thing that works. And that's elevatefreegift.com. So open up the browsers, elevatefreegift.com, theactualizedself.com. Mike, I want to thank you for sharing your story and your insight and your wisdom and being vulnerable today.
Yeah, it was great to speak with you. Thanks again for the opportunity and look forward to staying connected.
Awesome. And everybody, remember, when we feel good about who we are and what we do, we create joy and elevate humanity. We will see you next time on Be the Wolf.